With barely enough food for her children and a storm sealing them in, Nora had already sacrificed everything to keep her family alive. But when she found a dying man buried in the snow and chose to bring him home, she didn't know that act of compassion would bring healing, hope, and a second chance for them all, just when they needed it most. The cabin creaked and moaned under the assault of the wind. Drafts snaked through the cracks in the walls, chilling the small living space despite Nora's best efforts to seal them with old towels and strips of fabric. In the kitchen, little more than a corner of the main room with a stove and a small refrigerator, Nora added another cup of water to the soup pot, watching as the broth thinned from barely there to almost nothing. She glanced at the children by the fireplace. Leo sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, methodically feeding small sticks into the flames, making each one last as long as possible. His father's sweater hung from his thin frame, the sleeves rolled up a dozen times to free his hands. He had taken on the mantle of man of the house with a solemnity that broke Nora's heart. Kira was curled up with a tattered picture book, her breath creating small clouds in the chilly air. She wore 3 layers of clothing and a knit hat pulled down over her ears, yet still managed to look like a bright spot of sunshine in the dim room. Between them lay Jasper, their scruffy terrier mix, his eyes alert despite his relaxed posture. He had been Mark's dog originally, but had appointed himself guardian of the family after Mark's passing. Now he watched over the children with devoted attention, especially on days like today when the world outside seemed determined to swallow them whole. Nora stirred the soup again, then reached for the last heel of bread. She would cut it into 3 small pieces, one for each of them. Her own stomach growled in protest, but she had learned to ignore its complaints. A mother's hunger was always secondary. "Soup's almost ready," she called, forcing brightness into her voice. Leo looked up, his eyes knowing. At 10, he understood more than she wished he did. "Is there enough?" he asked quietly, so Kira wouldn't hear. Nora smiled reassuringly. "Plenty," she lied. "And with this bread, it'll be a feast." Leo nodded, but his eyes lingered on her face, seeing the hollows in her cheeks that hadn't been there months ago. The way her clothes hung more loosely now. He turned back to the fire without comment, adding another stick with deliberate care. Kira bounced up, her energy undimmed by the cold or hunger. "Can I set the table, Mommy? Can I use the special napkins?" The special napkins were simply paper towels that Nora had cut into squares and let Kira decorate with crayons. They used them only on special occasions, which lately meant whenever Kira needed a boost of cheer. "Of course, sweetheart. This is definitely a special napkin kind of night." Kira beamed and skipped to the drawer where they kept their meager table settings. Outside, the wind howled louder, rattling the windows in their frames. Nora glanced worriedly at the ceiling, where a small water stain had begun to spread earlier that day. The roof was another repair they couldn't afford, another problem for the growing list. As they gathered around the small table, Nora served the watery soup with ceremony, making sure Leo and Kira's bowls contained any solid bits of potato or carrot she could find. She placed the small pieces of bread on their special napkins and sat down across from them. "Let's say grace," she said, reaching for their hands. They bowed their heads, and Nora spoke the same words she had every night since Mark died. "Thank you for this food, for our home, and for each other. Please watch over us and help us find our way. Amen." "Amen," echoed the children. They ate slowly, making each spoonful last. Nora praised the soup as if it were a gourmet creation, and Kira giggled, playing along. Only Leo remained solemn, his eyes darting occasionally to his mother's bowl, noticing how she seemed to be moving the liquid around more than consuming it. "You need to eat too, Mom," he said finally. Nora took an obedient spoonful. "I am eating, honey. I'm just enjoying the conversation." Leo didn't look convinced, but he returned to his own meal without further comment. After dinner, with the dishes washed and put away, they gathered again by the fire. The radio, an old battery-powered model that had been Mark's, crackled with static as Nora tuned it, searching for a weather report. "Worst blizzard in 30 years, a voice finally cut through the interference. "Roads throughout the county are impassable. Authorities are advising all residents to stay indoors and conserve heat and supplies. Power outages have been reported in several communities." Nora switched it off, not wanting the children to hear more. They had enough to worry about. "Will we be okay, Mommy?" Kira asked, her eyes wide. "Of course we will," Nora assured her, pulling her close. "We've got our fire, we've got our blankets, and most importantly, we've got each other." "And Jasper," Kira added, reaching to pat the dog's head. "And Jasper," Nora agreed with a smile. "Our brave protector." As if on cue, Jasper's ears perked up. He lifted his head, suddenly alert. "What is it, boy?" Leo asked, leaning forward. The dog rose to his feet, his attention fixed on the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest. "It's just the wind," Nora said, though something about the dog's behavior made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Jasper wasn't one to be spooked by storms. He'd been through many in his 9 years of life. The growl deepened, and suddenly Jasper was at the door, barking furiously, his paws scratching at the wood. "Jasper, hush!" Nora scolded, but the dog was insistent, his barks growing more frantic. Leo moved to the small window beside the door, wiping away the fog of condensation. "I can't see anything," he reported. "It's all white out there." Nora joined him, peering into the swirling snow. "Maybe it's a deer," she suggested, though deer rarely came this close to the cabin, especially during storms. Jasper continued his desperate barking, now throwing his body against the door as if trying to break through. "Something's wrong," Leo said, his young face grave. He's never acted like this before. A shiver of primal fear ran down Nora's spine. They were miles from the nearest neighbor. No one should be out in this weather. The roads had been impassable for a day. "Stay here with your sister," she told Leo, moving to grab Mark's heavy coat from its hook. "Lock the door behind me." "I'm coming with you," Leo said firmly, already pulling on his worn boots. "Leo, I need you to." "I'm coming," he repeated, reaching for the heavy-duty flashlight they kept for emergencies. His face was set with a determination that reminded her so much of Mark that she couldn't argue. "All right," she conceded, "but stay close to me." She turned to Kira, who was watching with wide, frightened eyes. "Kira, sweetheart, I need you to be my brave girl and stay here with Jasper. Can you do that?" Kira nodded solemnly. "I'll keep Jasper safe," she promised, misunderstanding but no less earnest. "That's right," Nora said, not correcting her. "And lock the door after us. Don't open it unless you hear my voice, okay?" Another solemn nod from Kira. Nora took a deep breath and opened the door. Immediately, the storm lunged at them, a physical force of wind and ice. The cold was breathtakingly brutal, stealing the air from her lungs. Jasper shot past them, a blur of motion against the white, barking and leaping through the deep snow. "Jasper, come back!" Nora called, but her voice was swallowed by the howling wind. Leo switched on the flashlight, its beam barely penetrating the thick curtain of falling snow. They plunged forward, following the sound of Jasper's barks. The snow was up to Nora's knees and nearly to Leo's waist, making each step a battle. They had gone perhaps 20 yards from the cabin when they saw Jasper, a dark shape against the white, digging frantically at a snowdrift near the line of pines that marked the edge of their property. "What's he found?" Leo shouted over the wind, pointing the flashlight. The beam illuminated something dark amid the snow, something that didn't belong. "Oh, God," Nora breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. They pushed forward with renewed urgency. As they got closer, the shape became clearer, a human form, almost entirely covered by the snow. Only a portion of what appeared to be a black coat was visible where Jasper had been digging. Nora fell to her knees beside the drift, her hands frantically brushing away snow. Leo joined her, working with equal desperation. Together they uncovered more of the coat, and then a shoulder, and finally the back of a man's head, dark hair now white with ice and snow. "He's face down," Leo said, his voice tight with fear and awe. "We need to turn him over," Nora replied, her mind racing. Carefully, working together, they managed to roll the man onto his back. In the beam of the flashlight, his face was a shocking blue, white, his lips purple, eyelashes crusted with ice. A gash on his temple was caked with frozen blood. He was a large man, well-built and dressed in what appeared to be expensive clothing, though it was hard to tell in their current conditions. Nora pulled off her glove with her teeth and pressed trembling fingers to the man's neck, searching for a pulse. The cold made it difficult to feel anything, and for a terrifying moment, she thought they were too late. Then she felt it, the faintest flutter beneath her fingertips. "He's alive!" she exclaimed. "Leo, help me!" "How do we move him?" Leo asked, looking at the man's substantial size compared to their own frames. "He's too big." "We have to try," Nora said, already repositioning herself at the man's shoulders. "You take his feet. We'll drag him if we have to." What followed was a blur of desperate strength and determination. The man was dead weight, completely unresponsive as they struggled to move him through the deep snow. Progress was painfully slow. Every few feet they had to stop, catch their breath, and readjust their grip. The wind cut through their clothing like knives, and the snow continued to fall heavily, threatening to bury them all if they didn't move quickly enough. Nora's muscles screamed in protest, but she pushed through the pain. A life hung in the balance. She could feel the cold seeping into her bones, and knew the stranger must be in far worse condition after lying in the snow for who knew how long. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they reached the cabin door. Leo pounded on it with his fist. "Kira, it's us. Open the door." There was a moment of silence. then the sound of the lock turning. Kira's small face appeared in the doorway, her eyes growing huge at the sight of the unconscious stranger. "Is he dead?" she whispered, backing away to let them enter. "No, sweetheart, but he's very cold," Nora said, her breath coming in gasps as she and Leo finally managed to get the man over the threshold. They collapsed inside, slamming the door against the raging storm. "Is he a frozen giant, Mommy?" Kira asked, staring at the man with a mixture of fear and fascination. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Nora almost smiled at her daughter's imagination. "No, honey, he's just a man who got caught in the storm, and now we need to help him." As Nora caught her breath, her mind raced through what needed to be done. The stranger's wet clothes would have to be removed, a task that felt both invasive and absolutely necessary. They needed to warm him gradually, not too quickly, which could cause shock, and they needed to clean and assess his head wound. "Leo, build up the fire as much as you can," she instructed, already moving to collect towels and blankets. "Kira, I need you to get the first aid kit from the bathroom." The children sprang into action, grateful for clear direction in this strange and frightening situation. Nora knelt beside the unconscious man and began carefully removing his snow-crusted coat. Beneath it, he wore what appeared to be an expensive suit, now soaked through. A silver watch glinted on his wrist, its face cracked, likely from his fall or whatever accident had left him stranded in the blizzard. This was no local, Nora realized. No one from Frostpine Ridge would be out in a storm dressed like this. He must have been traveling through. Perhaps his car had gone off the road somewhere nearby. With Leo's help, she managed to remove the stranger's wet clothes, averting her eyes as much as possible to preserve his dignity. She dressed him in some of Mark's old clothes, a flannel shirt and sweatpants that had been too precious to donate but too painful to see every day. They were loose on Mark's frame, not designed for someone of the stranger's build, but they were dry and warm. Together, they moved him to the pull-out sofa, the best bed they had, and piled every spare blanket and quilt on top of him. His skin remained frightfully cold to the touch, and his breathing was shallow. "Will he wake up?" Kira asked, standing at a safe distance but unable to take her eyes off their unexpected guest. "I hope so," Nora replied honestly. "But right now his body needs to rest and get warm." She cleaned the gash on his temple as best she could, relieved to find it wasn't as deep as she had initially feared. Still, head injuries could be deceptive. Without a phone or a way to reach the clinic 15 miles away, they were on their own. As the night deepened, the storm showed no signs of abating. The wind continued to howl, and the temperature inside the cabin dropped steadily despite the fire that Leo vigilantly maintained. Nora arranged the sleeping bags for the children near the fireplace, the warmest spot in the house, while she took up a position beside the stranger, monitoring his breathing and occasionally spooning small amounts of warm broth between his lips. "Try to sleep," she told the children, though she knew Leo, at least, would struggle to do so. "I'll wake you if anything changes." Eventually, exhaustion overcame curiosity and concern, and both children drifted off. Jasper took up a protective position at the foot of the pull-out sofa, his eyes moving between Nora and the stranger as if assessing the situation. "You found him, Jasper?" Nora whispered, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. "You're a hero." The dog's tail thumped once against the floor, a modest acknowledgement of the praise. Dawn broke with little change in the weather. Inside the cabin, Nora jerked awake from a brief, unintended doze, immediately checking on the stranger. His color had improved slightly overnight, no longer the frightening blue-white of near-frozen flesh, but still far too pale. Leo was already awake, quietly adding wood to the fire. "How is he?" "A little better, I think," Nora replied, keeping her voice low to avoid waking Kira, who still slept curled in her sleeping bag, one arm thrown around Jasper. "But he still hasn't regained consciousness," Leo nodded solemnly. "I checked our wood supply. If we're careful, we have enough for maybe 3 more days." Nora felt a twist of anxiety. Wood was their primary source of heat, with the furnace so unreliable, and in normal circumstances, they rationed it carefully. Having to maintain a constant fire for their guest would deplete their store much faster than planned. "We'll manage," she said with more confidence than she felt. "The storm can't last forever." Leo looked skeptical but didn't argue. He had learned early that some worries were better kept to himself. Kira stirred then, sitting up with her hair in wild disarray, eyes immediately seeking out the stranger on the pull-out sofa. "Is the frozen man better?" she asked, her voice loud in the quiet room. "Shh, not so loud, sweetheart," Nora cautioned. "Yes, he's doing a little better, but he needs to rest." Kira nodded solemnly, then a look of concern crossed her face. "Is he hungry?" "I'm hungry." The simple question highlighted a harsh reality. Their food supply, already meager, would now need to stretch even further. Half a loaf of bread, some rice, a few potatoes, a small amount of oatmeal, and the remainder of last night's watery soup. Not enough for 3 people for more than a day or two, let alone 4. "I'll make us some oatmeal," she said, rising from her chair with a wince as stiff muscles protested. "Leo, would you check if the pipes are frozen? We might need to melt snow for water." The morning proceeded with a strained normalcy. They ate their small portions of oatmeal, made thinner than usual to ensure there would be enough for later, and Nora managed to coax a few spoonfuls of the warm mixture between the stranger's lips. He swallowed reflexively but didn't wake. The day stretched ahead of them, long and uncertain. With the storm still raging, there was no possibility of venturing out for help or supplies. They were on their own. Nora established a routine. Every hour, she checked on the stranger, monitoring his pulse, his breathing, the wound on his head. She spooned small amounts of broth or water into his mouth, careful not to give too much at once. Between these tasks, she tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for the children, reading stories to Kira and helping Leo with the science project he had been working on before the storm hit. By mid-afternoon, their situation had grown more precarious. The roof was leaking in 2 places now, requiring buckets to catch the drips. The temperature inside the cabin continued to drop despite the fire, and their food supply looked even more pitiful when spread out for inventory. "We should have left him," Leo said suddenly, his voice low as he stared at the unconscious man. "We don't have enough for ourselves, let alone him." "Leo?" Nora was shocked at the uncharacteristic hardness in her son's voice. "It's true," he insisted, though he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "What if the storm lasts for days? What if he never wakes up? We're just wasting food and wood on a stranger who might die anyway." Nora knelt in front of her son, taking his cold hands in hers. "Listen to me," she said firmly. "We did the right thing. He would have died out there, and I could never live with myself if we had left him, and neither could you. This is what your father would have done, and it's what we will do. We help people who need help. That's who we are." Leo's eyes filled with tears that he stubbornly refused to let fall. "But who helps us, Mom? Dad's gone, and nobody's coming to save us." The raw pain in his voice broke something in Nora's heart. "We help each other," she said softly, "and sometimes that has to be enough. Now, I need you to be the strong, compassionate boy I know you are. Can you do that for me?" After a long moment, Leo nodded, a single tear escaping despite his efforts to contain it. Nora wiped it away gently with her thumb. "Good. Now, let's see if we can figure out a way to catch more of that drip before it ruins the floorboards." As evening approached, she prepared another pot of soup, even thinner than the night before. The children didn't complain, though she saw the hunger in their eyes. After dinner, as Nora sat beside the stranger, wiping his brow with a cool cloth, she noticed a change. His eyelids flickered, and a small sound escaped his lips. Not quite a word, but definitive evidence of returning consciousness. "Leo, Kira," she called softly. "I think he's waking up." The children gathered around, watching with wide eyes as the man's face contorted slightly, his head turning on the pillow. "Can you hear me?" Nora asked, leaning closer. "You're safe. We found you in the snow." The man's eyes opened suddenly, startlingly blue and filled with confusion. He tried to sit up, then fell back with a groan, his hand going to his injured temple. "Easy," Nora cautioned, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've been unconscious for almost a day." He stared at her, then at the children, his gaze unfocused and disoriented. Where am I?" His voice was raspy, barely audible. "You're in our home, on Frostpine Ridge," Nora explained. "There's a blizzard. We found you collapsed in the snow yesterday evening." He looked down at the unfamiliar clothes he was wearing, then back at Nora, confusion deepening on his face. I don't remember." "You hit your head," Nora said gently, "and you were suffering from hypothermia. Some confusion is normal." "What's your name?" Leo asked, stepping forward, his earlier resistance apparently forgotten in the face of this new development. The man's brow furrowed with effort, a flash of panic crossing his face. I don't know. I can't remember." Kira, who had been hanging back shyly, suddenly moved forward. "We can call you Arthur," she announced decisively. "Arthur?" the man repeated, looking puzzled. "Like King Arthur," Kira explained. "From my storybook. He was brave and good." A faint smile touched the man's lips. "Arthur," he said again as if testing the sound. "I suppose that will do until I remember my real name." "Are you hungry, Arthur?" Nora asked. "We have some soup." He nodded cautiously, as if the movement hurt. "Yes, thank you. I'm sorry to impose on you like this." "You're not imposing," Nora assured him. "We couldn't leave you out there." As Nora went to heat a portion of soup, she heard Kira chattering to Arthur, explaining about the blizzard and how Jasper had found him. The man listened attentively, his confusion gradually giving way to a cautious engagement with the child's story. When Nora returned with the soup, little more than hot water with a few specks of vegetable floating in it, she found Kira perched on the edge of the sofa, showing Arthur her favorite picture book, while Leo stood back, watching with guarded curiosity. "Here you go," Nora said, setting the soup on a small table beside the sofa. "Can you manage, or do you need help?" "I think I can manage," Arthur replied, though his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the spoon. He took a careful sip, then another, as if each one required concentration. "It's good," he said after a moment, and Nora felt a flush of embarrassment. The soup was terrible. He was either being polite or was too disoriented to notice. "It's just water with a potato and some leeks," Kira informed him matter-of-factly. "We don't have much food because of the storm." "Kira," Nora said sharply, mortified by her daughter's honesty. "It's all right," Arthur said. "I appreciate your sharing what you have." He looked around the small cabin, taking in the patched furniture, the leaking roof, the meager wood pile beside the fire. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've given me your bed, haven't you?" "It's just the pull-out sofa," Nora said quickly. "The children and I are fine by the fire." Arthur frowned. "I've displaced you in your own home, and you're sharing your limited supplies with a stranger." "A hurt stranger," Leo said unexpectedly. "Mom says we help people who need help. That's who we are." Arthur's gaze shifted to the boy, something like respect kindling in his eyes. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." Leo nodded seriously. "She is." As night fell again, they rearranged their sleeping arrangements. Arthur insisted he was well enough to move to a chair so the children could use the pull-out sofa, but Nora wouldn't hear of it. "You're still recovering," she said firmly. "You need proper rest." In the end, they compromised. The children took the pull-out sofa while Nora made a pallet for herself on the floor beside it, and Arthur reluctantly remained in the more comfortable bed, though he insisted on taking only one blanket, leaving the others for Nora and the children. The storm continued, unabated through the night. Nora slept fitfully, waking often to check on their guest. Each time, she found him either sleeping restlessly or staring at the ceiling, his expression troubled. During one such check, near dawn, she found him awake, his blue eyes clear in the dim light of the banked fire. "You should be sleeping," she whispered, not wanting to wake the children. "I was thinking," he replied, his voice equally soft. "Trying to remember anything. My name, where I'm from, what I was doing out in a blizzard. But there's nothing, just blank space where memories should be." "Give it time," Nora advised. "Brain injuries can be strange. The memories might come back all at once, or gradually, or not at all." He finished when she hesitated. "That's rare," she assured him, though she had no medical expertise to back up the claim. It simply seemed the kind thing to say. Arthur studied her face in the dim light. "You've taken a considerable risk for me," he said quietly. "I'm a stranger. I could be anyone." Nora hadn't allowed herself to consider that possibility, that the man they had rescued might be dangerous once recovered. She glanced at her sleeping children, a protective instinct rising in her chest. "Are you?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Dangerous, I mean." He seemed to consider the question seriously. "I don't think so," he said finally. "I don't feel dangerous. But then, I don't know who I am, so how can I be sure?" The honesty of his response reassured her more than a quick denial would have. "Well, you're hardly in a position to overpower anyone at the moment," she pointed out practically. "And Jasper is an excellent judge of character. He wouldn't have led us to you if you were a threat." At the mention of his name, Jasper, who was curled at the foot of the children's bed, lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the floor. Arthur smiled slightly. "I'll have to trust in Jasper's judgment then." "Get some rest," Nora advised, standing up. "Tomorrow's another day." The morning brought no improvement in the weather. Nora woke to find a fresh layer of snow on the windowsills inside the house where it had blown through invisible gaps in the wood. Their guest was awake before any of them, sitting up in bed and looking markedly better than the day before. Some color had returned to his face, and his eyes were clear and alert. "Good morning," he said as Nora stirred. "I hope I didn't wake you." "No, not at all," she assured him, quickly smoothing her hair, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. She must look a mess after 2 nights of broken sleep on the hard floor. The children woke soon after, Kira immediately bouncing over to Arthur with the unrestrained enthusiasm of a 6-year-old, while Leo maintained his watchful distance. Breakfast was a somber affair, the last of the oatmeal, stretched thin with extra water. Arthur insisted on a smaller portion, claiming he wasn't very hungry, though Nora suspected he was simply trying to ensure the children had enough. After breakfast, Arthur asked if he could help with anything. He was still weak, unsteady on his feet, but determined to contribute. "I've imposed enough," he insisted. "Please, Let me do something useful." Arthur sat at the table, helping Leo with his science project, a small motor the boy was trying to build from spare parts. To Nora's surprise, their guest seemed to have an intuitive understanding of the mechanics, guiding Leo's work with gentle suggestions and questions that led the boy to his own solutions. "You must be an engineer or something," Leo said, watching as Arthur's long fingers deftly adjusted a wire connection. Arthur looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Maybe. It does feel familiar, like my hands know what to do even if my mind doesn't remember why." Throughout the day, Nora observed their guest with cautious optimism. He was unfailingly polite, patient with Kira's endless questions, and genuinely helpful with Leo's project. There was an intelligence in his eyes that suggested education, and a certain grace in his movements that spoke of a man accustomed to comfort, despite his current circumstances. The real test came at dinner time. Their food supply had dwindled to almost nothing: a single potato, a handful of rice, and a small portion of dried beans that Nora had been saving for an emergency. This was that emergency. She did her best to create a meal from these meager ingredients, boiling the beans and rice together to create a simple stew, with the potato cut into the smallest pieces possible to give the illusion of abundance. Even so, the portions were painfully small. Arthur watched as she served the children first, then him, leaving the smallest portion for herself. His blue eyes narrowed slightly, taking in the situation with growing awareness. "When was the last time you had a full meal?" he asked suddenly, his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. Nora was taken aback by the directness of the question. "We're fine," she said automatically. "The storm will break soon, and then we can get to town for supplies." "That's not what I asked," Arthur persisted gently. "Your pantry is almost empty. Even before I arrived, you were running out of food, weren't you?" Nora hesitated, pride warring with honesty. "Things have been tight since my husband died," she admitted finally. "His medical bills took most of our savings, and my part-time work at the library doesn't cover much beyond the basic bills. We get by." "By getting by, you mean you go hungry so your children can eat," Arthur said, his tone not accusatory but filled with a quiet respect. Nora didn't answer, but her silence was confirmation enough. "I can't remember who I am," Arthur said after a moment, "but I know this isn't right. No one should have to choose between heating their home and feeding their children. No one should have to water down soup until it's barely more than hot liquid. And no mother should have to go hungry while feeding a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Nora said simply. "You're our guest, and we take care of our guests." Arthur looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he glanced at the children, who were carefully eating their small portions of stew, making each bite last as long as possible. "They're extraordinary," he said softly. "Both of them, and they clearly take after their mother." Nora felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the meager fire. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by the compliment. That night, as the storm howled outside and the temperature in the cabin dropped even further, they all huddled near the fire. Arthur, wrapped in a single blanket, sat on the floor with the children, listening as Nora read aloud from an old collection of fairy tales. Despite the hunger gnawing at their stomachs and the chill that no amount of layers seemed to keep at bay, there was a curious contentment in the small circle. For a brief time, the story transported them away from their precarious reality to a world where courage and kindness were always rewarded in the end. When the story was finished and the children reluctantly prepared for bed, Arthur caught Nora's eye. "Thank you," he said simply. "For the story?" she asked, confused. "For everything. For saving my life. For sharing your home, your food, your warmth when you had so little to spare. I don't know who I am, but I know enough to recognize true generosity when I see it." Nora felt her cheeks warm. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Arthur said with quiet certainty. "They wouldn't. What you've done is extraordinary, and I won't forget it, no matter what happens when my memory returns." The third day dawned with a subtle change in the atmosphere. Though the world outside remained white and impassable, there was a sense that the worst of the storm had passed. Inside the cabin, their situation had grown increasingly dire. The wood supply was down to a handful of logs, the food almost entirely gone. Nora had resorted to melting snow for water after the pipes froze completely during the night. The temperature inside the cabin had dropped to the point where they could see their breath even near the small fire. Yet amid these mounting challenges, a curious harmony had developed among the unlikely household. Arthur, though still weak from his ordeal, had become an integral part of their daily routine, and he insisted on taking over some of the more strenuous tasks from Nora, despite her protests that he was still recovering. "You've done enough," he told her firmly when she tried to stop him from bringing in snow to melt for water. "Let me help, please." There was something in his eyes, a determination mixed with gratitude, that made it impossible for Nora to refuse. So she stood back and watched as he methodically filled pot after pot with snow, his movements becoming steadier with each trip. By midday, they had established a system. Leo and Arthur took turns stoking the small fire and bringing in snow, while Nora and Kira sorted through the cabin's cupboards one more time, searching for anything edible they might have overlooked. Their search yielded pitiful results: a few stale crackers, a half-empty jar of peanut butter, and a can of tomato paste that had been pushed to the back of a shelf. It wasn't much, but it would keep them going for another day, maybe two if they rationed carefully. As Nora prepared their meager meal, a thin soup made from the tomato paste diluted with melted snow, with the stale crackers crumbled into it for substance, she couldn't help but worry. The radio had reported that the storm was expected to clear in another day or two, but even then, the roads might remain impassable for some time. Arthur seemed to sense her concern. He approached quietly, speaking low so the children wouldn't overhear. "They're going to be all right," he said, nodding toward Leo and Kira, who were playing a made-up game with Jasper near the fire. "You've made sure of that, have I?" Nora couldn't keep the doubt from her voice. "We're almost out of food. The wood is nearly gone, and it's getting colder by the hour. I don't know how much longer we can hold out." Arthur was silent for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "I've been watching you these past few days," he said finally. "The way you care for your children, the way you've cared for me, a complete stranger. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Nora." The sound of her name on his lips sent an unexpected warmth through her. It was the first time he had used it, though he must have heard the children say it dozens of times. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," she said, returning her attention to the soup pot. "There's no strength in that, just necessity." "That's where you're wrong," Arthur replied. "True strength isn't about grand gestures or heroic actions. It's about getting up every day and doing what needs to be done, especially when it's difficult. By that measure, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met." He paused, a look of confusion crossing his face. "At least, I think you are. I still can't remember who else I've met." Despite everything, Nora found herself smiling. There was something disarming about his honesty, about the way he admitted his confusion without self-pity. "Well, thank you," she said. "Coming from a man who may or may not be an expert on strength, that means a lot." Arthur laughed, a warm, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the dim cabin. "I deserved that," he admitted. "But my point stands. You're remarkable, Nora. Your children are lucky to have you." Before she could respond, Leo called from across the room. "Mom, Arthur, the radio says the storm is breaking tomorrow, and they're sending plows out to the main roads." The news sent a surge of relief through Nora. Just one more day. They could manage one more day. That evening, as they shared their small meal around the fire, a new atmosphere prevailed. Hope had returned, buoyed by the promise of the storm's end, and the knowledge that help would soon be on its way. Kira, always sensitive to changes in mood, suggested they play a game. "Let's pretend we're explorers in an ice castle, and we have to tell stories to keep the ice giants away." "Ice giants, huh?" Arthur said, playing along. "Sounds dangerous. What kind of stories will keep them at bay?" "Happy ones," Kira declared confidently. "Ice giants hate happy stories. They melt." "Well, we certainly wouldn't want any melting giants in here," Arthur said seriously. "It would make a terrible mess. Who will tell the first happy story?" "You," Kira pointed at him. "You have to go first because you're the guest." Arthur looked momentarily flustered. "I'm not sure I remember any stories," he admitted, "with my memory the way it is." "Make one up," Leo suggested, unexpectedly engaged in the game despite his usual reserve. "That's what Kira does all the time." Arthur considered this, then nodded. "All right, a happy story to ward off ice giants. Here goes." To Nora's surprise, Arthur turned out to be a natural storyteller. He wove a tale about a lonely eagle who lived on a mountain peak, far from other birds. The eagle had everything it could want: the best hunting grounds, the highest perch, the most impressive view, but it was desperately unhappy because it had no one to share these things with. One day, a terrible storm forced the eagle to take shelter in a valley, where it found a family of sparrows huddled in a small nest. Though the sparrows had very little, they shared their shelter and their food with the eagle. In their company, the eagle discovered a happiness it had never known before. When the storm ended, the eagle didn't return to its solitary peak. Instead, it built a new nest near the sparrows, and together they created a community where all birds were welcome, regardless of size or strength or hunting prowess. As Arthur concluded his story, Nora caught his eye over the heads of the children. The parallel to their own situation wasn't lost on her, nor, she suspected, on him. "That was a good story," Leo said approvingly. "I bet the ice giants hated it. I can feel them retreating already." Arthur agreed solemnly, though his eyes, still on Nora's, held a different message, one of gratitude and something else, something warmer. Kira went next, telling a rambling tale about a princess who could talk to animals and used this power to organize a grand forest party. Leo followed with a surprisingly poignant story about a robot who learned to feel emotions by observing a human family. When it was Nora's turn, she found herself telling a story she hadn't thought about in years, the story of how she and Mark had met, fell in love, and built their life together. She kept it simple for the children's sake, focusing on the happy memories, their first date at a county fair, the tiny apartment they'd shared when first married, the joy of bringing Leo and then Kira home from the hospital. As she spoke, she realized it was the first time in years she had talked about Mark without the sharp edge of grief cutting through the memories. The pain was still there, but it was accompanied now by a warm gratitude for the time they'd had together. The children listened with rapt attention, occasionally interjecting with questions or their own half-remembered additions to the stories. Arthur remained quiet, his expression thoughtful as he absorbed this glimpse into their life before he had entered it. When Nora finished, a comfortable silence fell over the group, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the softer now but still persistent moaning of the wind outside. "I think we've definitely scared away all the ice giants," Arthur said finally, his voice gentle. "Thank you for sharing your stories, all of you." "Your turn again," Kira insisted. "Tell us another one." Arthur smiled at her eagerness. "All right, but a shorter one this time. It's getting late, and even ice giant hunters need their sleep." His second story was simpler, a tale about a star that fell to Earth and discovered that being grounded wasn't as terrible as it had feared. There was beauty to be found in the small details of earthly life that couldn't be seen from far away in the sky. As he spoke, Nora found herself watching his face, the play of emotions across features that had become familiar in such a short time. When the stories were done and the children reluctantly prepared for bed, Arthur helped Nora bank the fire for the night, carefully arranging the remaining logs to ensure they would burn as long as possible. That night, as the temperature in the cabin dropped to its lowest yet, they abandoned their separate sleeping arrangements by unspoken mutual agreement. They pulled the mattress from the pull-out sofa onto the floor near the dying fire, and all four of them huddled together beneath every blanket and quilt they possessed, with Jasper curled at their feet providing additional warmth. It should have been awkward, this forced intimacy with a man who was still, in many ways, a stranger. But somehow it wasn't. There was a comfort in their shared body heat, in the sound of the children's steady breathing, in the knowledge that they were facing this hardship together. As Nora drifted toward sleep, she felt Arthur's voice more than heard it, a low rumble beside her ear. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything." She didn't respond, pretending to be already asleep, but in the darkness, she allowed herself a small smile. These days would remain a unique chapter in their shared history, a time when the boundaries between stranger and family had blurred, when survival had forged an unexpected bond. Morning brought the change they had been waiting for. Nora woke to an unfamiliar brightness in the cabin. Sunlight, pale but brilliant. The storm had finally broken. She disentangled herself carefully from the sleeping pile, trying not to wake the others. Jasper followed her to the window, his tail wagging hopefully at the sight of the clear sky. "Yes," she whispered to him, scratching behind his ears. "Soon, but the roads will still need to be cleared." As if in answer to her thoughts, a distant mechanical rumble reached her ears. She pressed closer to the window, squinting against the glare of sun on snow, and saw it, far down the road, a snowplow making its slow but steady progress toward them. Relief flooded through her, so intense it made her knees weak. Help was coming. They had made it through. Behind her, she heard movement as the others began to stir. Arthur was the first to join her at the window, his tall form casting a shadow across the sunlit floor. "The storm's over," he said, stating the obvious but with such wonder in his voice that Nora couldn't help but smile. "Yes," she agreed. "And there's a plow coming up the road. We should be able to get to town in a few hours." Arthur's expression changed. "Town," he repeated, as if the word held some significance beyond its simple meaning. Nora understood his concern. "Maybe being there will trigger some memories," she suggested gently. "And we can check with the sheriff, see if anyone's reported a missing person matching your description." Arthur nodded, but the troubled look remained. "And if no one has? If my memory doesn't return?" Nora hesitated. She had been so focused on getting through the immediate crisis that she hadn't given much thought to what would happen after. Before she could formulate a response, Leo and Kira had joined them, both exclaiming over the transformed landscape and the welcome sight of the distant plow. "Does this mean we can go to the store?" Kira asked, her primary concern, as always, refreshingly straightforward. "I'm hungry." "Yes, sweetheart," Nora assured her. "As soon as the road is clear, we'll go to town and get food." "And Arthur will come too?" The question held a note of anxiety, as if Kira feared their guest might disappear with the storm. Arthur knelt to her level, his face gentle. "Yes, I'll come too. I need to see if anyone in town recognizes me. After all." Kira's face fell. "But what if someone does? Will you go away?" The question hung in the air, giving voice to a concern that Arthur had become part of their little unit over these past days. The thought of him simply walking away once his identity was established left a curious emptiness. "I don't know," Arthur answered honestly. "But whatever happens, I won't forget you, Kira. Or your brother, or your mother, or even Jasper. You saved my life, all of you. That creates a bond that doesn't just disappear." Kira seemed satisfied with this answer, but Nora noticed Leo hanging back, his expression guarded. The boy had finally begun to warm to Arthur, to trust him. The prospect of another loss, so soon after his father, was clearly troubling him. "Let's focus on today," Nora suggested, deliberately lightening her tone. "We need to get ready for town. Leo, can you check how much snow is on the porch? We might need to shovel a path to the road. Kira, let's find your warmest clothes. And Arthur, I think I might have an extra coat of Mark's that would fit you better than those old sweats." The practical tasks helped dispel the moment of uncertainty, giving everyone a purpose and a focus beyond the looming question of what came next. As they prepared for their expedition to town, Nora couldn't help but notice how naturally Arthur had integrated into their routines. He helped Leo clear a path from the porch to where the plow would eventually reach, showing the boy how to lift with his legs rather than his back. He assisted Kira in finding her missing boot, which had somehow migrated under the sofa, and he worked alongside Nora to secure the cabin, ensuring the fire was completely extinguished and the windows latched against the possibility of animals seeking shelter in their absence. "Mom, Arthur, the plow is almost here." They joined the children on the cleared portion of the porch, watching as the massive vehicle made its final approach, carving a path through the pristine snow. The operator, a burly man in a fluorescent orange jacket, waved at them as he passed, continuing up the road to clear the remaining stretch before turning around. It would be another hour or so before he made his way back, completing the circuit that would connect their isolated cabin to the rest of Frostpine Ridge. As they waited, a sense of anticipation built among them. For the children, it was simple: the prospect of food, warmth, and a return to normalcy. For Nora, it was more complicated: relief at their imminent rescue, mingled with anxiety about what would come next, about bills that couldn't be paid and repairs that couldn't be postponed. And for Arthur, she could only imagine the conflicting emotions, the hope of recovering his identity balanced against the fear of what that identity might entail, and perhaps, though she couldn't be sure, a reluctance to leave the strange intimacy they had established in their days of shared crisis. When the plow finally returned, clearing the last stretch of road to their cabin, they were ready. Bundled in every layer they could manage, they set out for town, a small, determined procession against the vast white landscape. Leo led the way, forging a path through the sections where the snow still drifted deep. Kira followed, occasionally being lifted over particularly challenging spots by Arthur, who stayed close to her, watchful and protective. Nora brought up the rear with Jasper, her mind already making lists of immediate necessities and calculating what little money remained in their emergency fund. The walk to town, normally 30 minutes, took them over an hour in the difficult conditions. By the time they reached the main street of Frostpine Ridge, they were exhausted, cold, and hungry, but buoyed by the sight of other people and the promise of warmth and food. The small town was just beginning to emerge from its storm-induced hibernation. Shopkeepers were clearing sidewalks, neighbors were checking on each other, and the diner in the center of town had a open sign illuminated in its window, a beacon of normalcy in the aftermath of chaos. As they approached the diner, Nora hesitated. She couldn't afford to feed them all, not with their situation as dire as it was. But before she could suggest an alternative, Arthur spoke up. "I think I might have some money," he said, reaching into the pocket of Mark's old coat that she had given him. To their mutual surprise, he withdrew a slim leather wallet. "This was in the coat," he explained, looking as confused as she felt. "That's not possible," Nora said. "That coat has been hanging in the closet for 2 years. I never." She trailed off, a memory surfacing. Mark had worn that coat the day he was admitted to the hospital for the last time. She had brought it home, hanging it in the closet, unable to deal with going through the pockets, unable to face that final task of sorting his personal effects. For 2 years, it had hung there, untouched. Arthur opened the wallet carefully. Inside was $43 in cash. Mark's last withdrawal, Nora realized, money he never had the chance to spend, and an old photograph of Nora and the children, taken when Kira was still a baby. "I'm sorry," Arthur said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This was your husband's. I had no right to—" "No," Nora interrupted, her voice thick with unexpected emotion. It's all right. Mark would have wanted us to use it, especially now. Arthur looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the gift she was making, not just of the money, but of the permission to use this last tangible resource her husband had left behind. Then let's get these children something to eat, he said gently. And after that, we can visit the sheriff's office, see if anyone's looking for me. As they entered the warm, fragrant interior of the diner, the reality of their situation receded temporarily. For a brief, blessed interlude, they were just a family seeking refuge from the cold. Their focus narrowed to the immediate pleasures of hot food and comfortable surroundings. But as they ate, hearty plates of eggs and pancakes that the children devoured with barely contained enthusiasm, Nora couldn't help but wonder what would happen when they visited the sheriff. The questions hung unspoken as they finished their meal, each of them aware that their time in this liminal space, neither strangers nor quite family, was drawing to a close. Whatever came next would redefine them, separately or together. With the meal finished and the bill paid, Arthur insisting on leaving a generous tip from Mark's money, a gesture that brought unexpected tears to Nora's eyes, they prepared to face the next step in their journey. The sheriff's office was a small, unassuming building in the center of Frostpine Ridge, distinguished only by the official seal on its door and the patrol vehicle parked outside. As they approached, Nora felt a growing tension, a sense that they were approaching a turning point. Arthur, too, seemed to feel it. His pace slowed, and she noticed his hand move to the wound on his temple, a gesture he made unconsciously when trying to force his memory. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly while the children walked ahead, fascinated by the patrol car. "Just nervous, I suppose," he admitted. "What if they don't know who I am either? Or what if they do, and I'm not someone you would have chosen to help if you'd known?" The vulnerability in his question touched her. "I think we already know who you are," she said. "Memory or no memory. The past few days have shown your character more clearly than any name or title could." Arthur's expression softened, gratitude, and something warmer in his eyes. "Thank you for that. It means more than you know." Before he could say more, the door to the sheriff's office opened, and Sheriff Dawson himself stepped out, his weathered face breaking into a smile at the sight of Nora and the children. "Nora Sterling," he called, striding toward them with outstretched hands. "I was just about to send a deputy up to your place to check on you folks. Heard your road was one of the last to get plowed." "We're fine, Sheriff," Nora assured him, accepting his handshake. "But we do need your help." She gestured toward Arthur. "This is, well, we're not exactly sure who he is. We found him collapsed in the snow near our cabin during the blizzard. He's been with us for the past 3 days, but he has amnesia from a head injury." Sheriff Dawson's expression shifted to professional concern as he turned to Arthur. "Is that right, sir? You don't remember who you are or how you ended up out in that storm?" Arthur nodded. "I'm afraid so. Nothing before waking up in Nora's cabin." The sheriff studied him carefully, then motioned toward the door. "Well, let's get you folks inside and see what we can figure out. Maggie at the dispatch desk keeps up with all the missing persons reports. If someone's looking for you, she'll know." They followed Sheriff Dawson into the warm office, where Maggie, a brisk woman in her 60s with a cloud of gray hair, looked up from her computer with interest. "Well now, who do we have here?" she asked, her eyes twinkling at the children before settling curiously on Arthur. "Maggie, this gentleman was found out in the storm," Sheriff Dawson explained. "Head injury. Can't remember who he is. Any missing persons reports come in that might match?" Maggie adjusted her glasses, studying Arthur with renewed interest. "Let's see. We've had a few calls about folks not being able to reach family during the storm, but most of those have resolved as the phones came back online." She typed rapidly on her keyboard. "There was a report about a missing hiker over in Clearwater County, but he was found yesterday, and a teenage girl in Millfield who ran away but came home this morning." She looked up, shaking her head. "Nothing that matches a man of your description, I'm afraid." Arthur's shoulders slumped slightly. Nora couldn't tell if it was disappointment at the lack of leads or relief that no one was actively searching for him. "What about abandoned vehicles?" Sheriff Dawson suggested. "Any reports of cars off the road near Frostpine Ridge?" Maggie consulted her screen again. "The state police reported several abandoned vehicles on the highway, but all those drivers have been accounted for. They took shelter at the emergency center at the high school." She paused, her expression brightening. "Wait, there was something. A helicopter." "A helicopter?" Arthur repeated, the first sign of recognition flickering across his face. "Yes, the Forest Service reported a distress beacon from a private helicopter that went down somewhere in the National Forest during the storm," Maggie said, scrolling through her notes. "They haven't been able to send a search team yet because of the conditions, but they've got a general location from the beacon." "How far is that from our cabin?" Nora asked. a strange feeling building in her chest. Maggie studied the map on her screen. The coordinates put it about 3 miles from your property, Nora, up in the hills to the east. Arthur's hand went to his temple again, his expression intensely focused. I remember, falling, he said slowly. Not like a trip, a much longer sensation of falling. And noise, a terrible mechanical screaming. Sheriff Dawson looked at him sharply. That could be a helicopter crash, all right. The question is, were you the pilot, a passenger, or maybe someone who witnessed it and went to help? I don't know, Arthur said, frustration evident in his voice. It's just fragments, impressions, nothing concrete. Well, the Forest Service should have information on who owned the helicopter, Sheriff Dawson said. Let me make a call. As the sheriff moved to his desk and picked up the phone, Nora led the children to a bench along the wall. They were getting restless, the excitement of the day wearing on them after their ordeal. Will Arthur remember who he is now? Kira asked, her voice carrying in the small office. Maybe, sweetheart, Nora said, though she wasn't sure what to hope for. Part of her wanted Arthur to recover his memory and find his place in the world. Another part, a part she was reluctant to examine too closely, dreaded the moment when he would leave them. Across the room, she caught Arthur watching them, a similar conflict visible in his eyes. He crossed to join them on the bench, sitting beside Leo, who had been unusually quiet since they entered the sheriff's office. Are you okay, buddy? Arthur asked gently. Leo shrugged, not meeting his eyes. I guess. You don't seem very excited about possibly solving the mystery of who I am, Arthur observed, his tone light but understanding. Leo looked up then, his young face serious. What if you remember and you're someone important, someone who doesn't have time for people like us? Leo, he said carefully, I don't know who I was before I met you and your family, but I know who I am now, and that person would never forget what you've done for me. No matter who I turn out to be, that won't change. Leo didn't look entirely convinced, but before he could respond, Sheriff Dawson returned, his expression one of growing excitement. Well, I've got some interesting information, he announced. The helicopter is registered to Vance Innovations. Mean anything to you? He asked Arthur. Arthur frowned, concentrating. Vance. It sounds familiar, but I can't place it. It should, Sheriff Dawson said. Vance Innovations is one of the biggest tech companies in the country, and according to the flight plan, the only person aboard was Arthur Vance himself, the CEO. A stunned silence fell over the room. Even Maggie stopped typing, her mouth slightly open in shock. Arthur Vance? Arthur repeated, the name sounding foreign on his tongue. I'm Arthur Vance? Well, we can't be sure yet, Sheriff Dawson cautioned, but the timing, the location, and the fact that the children have been calling you Arthur. He shook his head in wonder. It's quite a coincidence if you're not him. Nora felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. Arthur Vance was one of the wealthiest men in the country, and for the past 3 days, he had been sleeping on their pull-out sofa, eating their meager food, and helping her children with their homework. She looked at Arthur, not Arthur Vance, just Arthur, the man who had become part of their family, and saw the same shock reflected in his face. I need to contact Vance Innovations immediately, Sheriff Dawson was saying. If you really are Arthur Vance, there will be people very anxious to know you're alive. Yes, of course, Arthur said automatically, though he seemed dazed. His eyes sought Nora's, a question in them that she couldn't quite answer. While Sheriff Dawson made the call, they sat in stunned silence. Kira, not fully comprehending the significance of the revelation, leaned against Arthur's side as naturally as ever. Leo, however, had withdrawn slightly, his earlier fears seemingly confirmed by this dramatic turn of events. Vance Innovations, Sheriff Dawson was saying into the phone. Yes, I need to speak to someone regarding Arthur Vance. Yes, I understand he's missing. That's actually why I'm calling. No, I cannot hold for 30 minutes. This is an emergency call from the Frostpine Ridge Sheriff's Department regarding your missing CEO. His authoritative tone apparently worked because moments later he was speaking with someone in a position of greater authority. Yes, I believe we have located Mr. Vance. He was found during the blizzard suffering from exposure and a head injury. He's alive but experiencing amnesia. Yes, we can verify his identity once you arrive. As the sheriff continued the conversation, Arthur leaned toward Nora. I still don't remember, he whispered. The name, the company, they don't trigger anything concrete, just that same sense of responsibility I mentioned earlier. It's okay, Nora assured him, though she wasn't sure it was. How could anything be okay when their worlds were so vastly different? Your memory might return gradually, or it might not, Arthur said, a note of determination entering his voice. Either way, what I said to Leo stands. I won't forget what you've done for me. I won't just disappear from your lives. Nora wanted to believe him, but the reality of who he was made his promise seem impossible to keep. Sheriff Dawson hung up the phone and returned to them, his expression impressed. "Well, they're sending a team immediately. Helicopter should be here within the hour, and they're very, very relieved to hear you're alive, Mr. Vance." "Please, just Arthur," he said, looking uncomfortable with the formal address, "at least until I remember being anyone else." The next hour passed in a strange limbo. The sheriff insisted they remain at the office to wait for the Vance Innovations team, offering them coffee and sending a deputy to the general store for sandwiches and supplies for Nora and the children. Arthur sat quietly, occasionally attempting to prompt his memory by asking questions about Vance Innovations and his role there, but nothing seemed to break through the barrier in his mind. Nora, meanwhile, tried to process the implications of this revelation. The man they had rescued, the man who had become woven into the fabric of their daily lives, was not just any stranger but one of the most powerful men in the business world. And yet, as she watched him with Kira, patiently listening to the child's rambling story about a dream she'd had, Nora couldn't reconcile the image of a cold, distant CEO with the warm, engaging man before her. Her thoughts were interrupted by the distinctive sound of helicopter blades approaching. Sheriff Dawson moved to the window, then nodded. "They're here," he announced, landing in the field behind the office. Arthur stood, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. This was the moment of truth, the beginning of his reconnection with his former life. "Will you come with me?" he asked Nora, his voice low. I'm not sure I'm ready to face this alone." The vulnerability in his request touched her deeply. Despite learning of his tremendous power and wealth, he was still the man who had sat beside her in the darkness of the storm, grateful for her care and company. "Of course," she said, "we'll all come." They followed Sheriff Dawson out the back door of the office to the open field where a sleek, black helicopter was touching down. The contrast between the sophisticated aircraft and the small town surroundings could not have been more stark. As the rotors slowed, the door of the helicopter opened, and a woman emerged. She was dressed in an impeccable dark gray suit that seemed impervious to the wrinkles and discomfort of helicopter travel. Her expression was a carefully controlled mask of professional concern, but as her eyes landed on Arthur, it broke into genuine relief. "Mr. Vance," she called, hurrying toward them. "Thank God you're alive." Arthur tensed beside Nora, his hand unconsciously finding hers and gripping it tightly. The woman reached them, her eyes quickly assessing Arthur's appearance, the borrowed clothes, the bandage on his temple, the several days' growth of beard. "Mr. Vance, I'm Evelyn Morris, your executive assistant," she said, her voice slightly breathless. "We've been searching for you since the distress beacon activated during the storm, when we couldn't get search teams in because of the weather." She trailed off, composing herself. "We feared the worst." Arthur nodded politely, but his expression remained blank. "I'm sorry, Miss Morris. I don't remember you." Evelyn's carefully maintained composure faltered. "What?" "Arthur suffered a head injury in the crash," Sheriff Dawson explained. "He's experiencing amnesia, doesn't remember anything before waking up in Mrs. Sterling's cabin." Evelyn's gaze shifted to Nora, taking in her worn coat and the children standing close beside her. Something in her expression changed, a subtle shift from relief to calculation. "I see," she said carefully. "Well, Mr. Vance, we should get you to a hospital immediately. Our medical team is standing by at Burlington Memorial. The helicopter is ready to transport you. These people saved my life. I'm not going anywhere without properly thanking them and ensuring they're taken care of." Evelyn's professional smile remained fixed. "Of course, Mr. Vance, we can arrange a suitable compensation package for their assistance. But your health must be our primary concern right now. The board is very anxious about your condition, and there are several urgent matters requiring your attention once you've been cleared medically." Arthur's expression hardened. "Ms. Morris, I understand that you're doing your job, but I'm not leaving until I'm satisfied that the Sterling family is properly cared for." Evelyn looked momentarily flustered by his firmness. "Aye, of course, Mr. Vance. Whatever you say." "Their cabin needs significant repairs," Arthur continued. "The roof leaks, the furnace is unreliable, and they're dangerously low on supplies. I want all of that addressed immediately." "We can certainly arrange," Evelyn began, but Arthur cut her off. "Today. I want it addressed today. Send a team to their cabin with whatever supplies and professionals are needed to make it safe and comfortable before nightfall." Nora felt a flush of embarrassment at having their precarious situation laid out so plainly, but Arthur's hand remained firmly clasped around hers, a silent reassurance. "Yes, Mr. Vance," Evelyn said, already pulling out a sleek phone. "I'll make the arrangements immediately." As she stepped away to make calls, Arthur turned to Nora, his expression softening. "I'm sorry if I overstepped," he said quietly, "but the thought of leaving you and the children in that cabin, knowing the conditions, It's all right, Nora assured him, though she felt a complex mix of gratitude and discomfort. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help, especially on such a scale. But you don't need to do all this. We would have managed. Arthur's blue eyes held hers steadily. You would have, yes. You're remarkably capable, but you shouldn't have to just manage, Nora. Not when I have the resources to help. Before she could respond, Evelyn returned. A team will be at the cabin within 2 hours, she reported. Contractors, supplies, everything you requested. And I've arranged for a credit account at the general store for Mrs. Sterling and her children. She handed Nora a card with a number written on it. This will cover whatever you need for the foreseeable future. Nora stared at the card, overwhelmed by the casual generosity it represented. I can't accept, please, Arthur interrupted gently. Consider it the beginning of repaying a debt I can never fully repay. Kira, who had been listening with wide eyes, tugged at Arthur's borrowed coat. Does this mean you have to go away now? She asked, her small face troubled. Arthur knelt to her level, his expression serious. I need to see a doctor, Kira, to help me remember who I am and to make sure my head is healing properly. But I promise you, this isn't goodbye. I'll come back to visit as soon as I can. Promise? Kira asked, holding out her small pinky finger. Without hesitation, Arthur linked his pinky with hers. I promise. Leo, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. You won't forget us once you're back in your rich people world? Arthur's expression softened as he turned to the boy. Leo, I may have forgotten my past, but I will never forget these past few days. You, your sister, and your mother showed me what true generosity looks like. That's not something anyone could forget, no matter who they turned out to be. Leo nodded, not entirely convinced but wanting to believe. Okay. Evelyn cleared her throat discreetly. Mr. Vance, the pilot is ready when you are. The medical team is waiting, and there are several urgent matters that will require your attention once you're cleared. Arthur straightened, a subtle change coming over him as he addressed his assistant. Cancel my appointments for the rest of the month. Evelyn blinked in surprise. Sir, but the merger? Cancel them, Arthur repeated, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. There was an authority in his tone that hadn't been present before, a glimpse perhaps of the CEO he had been. He turned back to Nora, his expression softening again. I need time to recover, to figure out who I am now, and I want to make sure the repairs to your cabin are done properly. You don't have to, Nora began, but Arthur shook his head. I want to, he said simply. Please let me do this. In the face of his sincerity, Nora found she couldn't refuse. All right, she agreed, but you focus on getting better first. The repairs can wait. They won't have to, Arthur assured her, with a confidence that suggested he was accustomed to having his instructions carried out promptly and efficiently. Sheriff Dawson, who had been observing the exchange with undisguised fascination, stepped forward. Well, Mr. Vance, it's been quite something meeting you, even under these unusual circumstances. Frost Pine Ridge isn't used to hosting celebrities of your caliber. Arthur smiled, extending his hand to the sheriff. Thank you for your help, Sheriff Dawson. I'm grateful for the care you've shown to me and to the Sterling family. As they prepared to part ways, Arthur pulled Nora slightly aside, his expression earnest. I meant what I said. This isn't goodbye. Once I'm cleared medically and have dealt with whatever crisis apparently requires my attention, I'll be back. We have a lot to talk about. Nora nodded, finding it hard to speak past the lump in her throat. The intensity in his eyes suggested deeper feelings than mere gratitude, feelings that had developed during their days of shared adversity, feelings she was reluctant to examine too closely, given the vast gulf between their worlds. Take care of yourself, she managed finally, and don't worry about us. We'll be fine. Arthur smiled, a genuine warmth that reached his eyes. I know you will. Arthur said his final goodbyes to the children, accepting a fierce hug from Kira and a more reserved but heartfelt handshake from Leo. Then, with a last look at the family who had saved him, he turned and followed Evelyn to the waiting helicopter. Nora and the children stood with Sheriff Dawson, watching as the sleek aircraft lifted off, carrying Arthur back to the world he had forgotten, a world of corporate boardrooms, immense wealth, and responsibilities they could barely imagine. As the helicopter became a distant speck against the blue sky, Kira slipped her small hand into Nora's. He'll come back, she said with the simple certainty of a child. He Pinky promised. Nora squeezed her daughter's hand, hoping Kira was right but not quite able to believe it herself. Let's go home, she said to the children, turning away from the empty sky. We have a lot to do before those workers arrive. As they walked back through town toward their cabin, Nora tried to focus on the practical aspects of their situation, the repairs that would make their home safer and more comfortable, the supplies they could now afford, the immediate easing of the financial pressure that had been crushing them for so long. But her mind kept returning to the man who had entered their lives as a nameless stranger and left as Arthur Vance, one of the most powerful men in the country. She wondered which version was more real, the vulnerable, thoughtful man who had sat by their fire, or the commanding CEO who had emerged briefly when dealing with his assistant. Perhaps both were authentic aspects of a complex person. Perhaps the crash and his time with them had revealed dimensions of his character that his everyday life had suppressed or neglected. Whatever the truth, Nora knew their lives had been changed by his brief presence, not just by the material assistance he had arranged, though that was significant, but by the connection they had formed, the reminder that human worth transcended social and economic boundaries. As they crested the hill and their cabin came into view, Nora was startled to see several vehicles already parked outside, a truck loaded with building materials, a van marked with a heating company logo, and a delivery vehicle from the general store. Arthur's resources were clearly substantial, and his influence immediate. Wow, Leo breathed, his eyes wide at the flurry of activity already underway. He really meant it. He promised, Kira said simply, as if that explained everything. The transformation of the Sterling household began immediately and proceeded with an efficiency that left Nora breathless. Within hours, a new furnace had been installed, the leaking roof repaired, and the pantry stocked with enough food to last for weeks. The workers moved with purpose, clearly instructed to prioritize comfort and safety above all else. By nightfall, the cabin was warmer than it had been in years. The children marveled at the changes, Leo examining the new furnace with fascination, Kira bouncing on her bed, newly outfitted with a thick comforter and fresh linens. Even Jasper seemed to sense the improvement, stretching contentedly on a new dog bed placed near the now reliable heat source. Nora watched it all with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. That night, as she tucked the children into their warm beds, Kira asked the question that had been on all their minds throughout the whirlwind day. When will Arthur come back, Mommy? I don't know, sweetheart. He has a lot to deal with right now. Doctors, his company, figuring out who he is. But he promised, Kira insisted, her faith in the pinky swear unshakable. Yes, he did, Nora acknowledged. And I believe he meant it when he said it. But his life is very different from ours, Kira. He's a very important man with a lot of responsibilities. More important than promises? Leo asked from his bed across the room, the question carrying a weight beyond his years. Nora sighed. No, not more important, but sometimes adults get pulled in different directions by their responsibilities. We have to be prepared for the possibility that Arthur might not be able to come back, even if he wants to. He'll come, Kira said with certainty, snuggling deeper under her new comforter. You'll see. Nora kissed her forehead, wishing she shared her daughter's confidence. Sweet dreams, both of you. As the days passed, life took on a new rhythm. The immediate pressures of survival had been relieved, allowing Nora to focus on other aspects of their lives that had been neglected during their long struggle. She enrolled Leo in an after-school robotics program he had longed to join, but they couldn't previously afford. Kira started dance classes at the community center, coming home each day with new twirls to demonstrate. Nora herself found breathing room to consider her own future. The library where she worked part-time had been looking for someone to coordinate children's programming, a position that paid better and offered more hours, but required time and energy she simply hadn't had while managing their basic survival. Now, with their home secure and the children's needs met, she applied for and received the position. 2 weeks after Arthur's departure, a large package arrived at their door. Inside were carefully selected gifts for each of them. For Leo, a state-of-the-art electronics kit that made his eyes widen in disbelief. For Kira, a beautiful set of art supplies and a pink winter coat that elicited squeals of delight. For Nora, a sleek laptop to replace the ancient desktop computer that had died months ago, leaving her to do all her work at the library. The note accompanying the gifts was handwritten, the script somewhat uneven, as if the writer was still recovering. Nora, Leo, and Kira, and Jasper too. My medical team tells me I'm making good progress. Some memories are returning, though not all. I remember more about Vance Innovations now, about my role there, and the work we do. It's strange to remember facts about my company while still having gaps about my personal life, but the doctors assure me this is normal with my type of injury. I wanted you to know that I haven't forgotten my promise. As soon as I'm cleared for travel, I'll be returning to Frostpine Ridge. There's much I want to discuss with you all. In the meantime, please accept these small tokens of my appreciation. Leo, the engineering manual included with your kit was one I used when I was not much older than you. Kira, the art supplies are from a company known for quality materials that will let your creativity shine. Nora, the laptop should make your work easier and include software that might be useful for your library programs. Looking forward to seeing you all soon. Warmly, Arthur. The personal nature of the gifts, selected with knowledge of their individual interests and needs, moved Nora deeply. This wasn't the impersonal generosity of a wealthy man discharging a debt. These were thoughtful choices made by someone who had paid attention, who had seen them as individuals with dreams and aspirations beyond mere survival. The children were thrilled, not just with the gifts themselves, but with the confirmation that Arthur remembered them, that he intended to return as promised. A week later, as Nora was organizing books for a new reading program at the library, she heard a commotion at the front desk. Looking up, she was startled to see Arthur himself standing in the entrance, scanning the room with evident purpose. He looked different, the borrowed clothes replaced by a well-tailored suit, the beard neatly trimmed, the pallor of illness giving way to healthy color, but his eyes were the same, lighting up with warmth when they found her among the bookshelves. "Arthur," she said, setting down the books and moving toward him. "You're here. I promised, didn't I?" he replied, smiling as he crossed to meet her. "Sorry it took so long. The doctors were being cautious about travel." 3 weeks isn't long, Nora assured him, suddenly conscious of her simple work clothes and hastily arranged hair. "We didn't expect you so soon. I would have come sooner if I could," he said, his expression earnest. "There's so much I want to talk to you about." "When do you finish work?" "In about an hour," Nora replied, still adjusting to the reality of his presence. "The children will be home from school soon after that." "Perfect," Arthur said. "I'll come to the cabin then, if that's all right. There are some things I'd like to discuss with all of you." Nora nodded, curious about what he might have in mind. "Of course, we'd love to have you." The hour passed in a blur of distraction. Nora found it difficult to focus on her tasks, her mind constantly circling back to Arthur's unexpected appearance and the conversation to come. When she arrived home, she found the children already there, buzzing with excitement. Word had spread quickly through the small town that the Arthur Vance, had returned and was seen heading toward the Sterling cabin. "Is it true, Mom?" Leo asked as soon as she entered. "Is Arthur really coming here?" "Yes, he'll be here soon," Nora confirmed, smiling at their enthusiasm. "He wants to talk to us about something." "I told you he'd come back," Kira said triumphantly, twirling in her new dance outfit. "Pinky promises can't be broken." Nora quickly changed out of her work clothes, tidied the already neat cabin, and had just finished setting out some coffee and cookies when there was a knock at the door. Arthur stood on the porch, a tentative smile on his face. Behind him was a sleek black SUV, clearly a rental rather than his usual corporate transportation. "Hello," he said simply, as if it had been days rather than weeks since they'd last seen each other. Before Nora could respond, Kira had darted past her and thrown herself at Arthur with a squeal of delight. He caught her easily, his smile widening into genuine pleasure. "You came back," Kira exclaimed, hugging him tightly. "Of course I did," Arthur replied, setting her down gently. "I promised, didn't I?" Leo approached more cautiously, but his handshake with Arthur was firm and his smile genuine. "The electronics kit is amazing," he said. "I've already built 3 of the projects." "I thought you might like it," Arthur said, clearly pleased. "I was about your age when I first started tinkering with circuits." "You remembered that?" Leo asked, surprised. "Yes, that memory came back pretty clearly," Arthur confirmed, along with many others, though there are still gaps. He turned to Nora then, his expression softening. "The cabin looks wonderful," he said, glancing around at the now cozy interior. "I'm glad the repairs were done to your satisfaction." "They went above and beyond," Nora assured him, gesturing for him to enter. "Please come in. I've made coffee, if you'd like some." As they settled in the living room, so different now with its new furniture and warm atmosphere, Nora could see Arthur taking in all the changes, noting the small personal touches that had been added now that survival was no longer their primary concern. "I want to thank you again," Nora said, handing him a mug of coffee, "for everything you've done for us. The repairs, the gifts, the account at the store. It's changed our lives." Arthur accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "It was the least I could do. But actually, that's part of what I wanted to talk to you about today." "Oh?" Nora felt a flutter of anxiety. "Yes," Arthur said, setting down his mug and leaning forward, his expression serious. "As my memory has returned, I've been reflecting a lot on my experience here with you and the children, about what I learned during those days when I couldn't remember who I was or what I possessed." Nora nodded encouragingly, though her anxiety remained. "I realized something important," Arthur continued. "When I was just Arthur, not Arthur Vance, the CEO, I was more present, more engaged, more alive than I had been in years." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "My doctors tell me that my amnesia, while triggered by the head injury, may have been exacerbated by extreme stress. Apparently, I had been working 16-hour days for months, driving myself and my team relentlessly toward deadlines and targets that, in retrospect, weren't as critical as I believed them to be. That sounds exhausting, Nora said softly, beginning to understand where he might be heading. It was, Arthur agreed, and ultimately counterproductive. In trying to build something significant, I had lost sight of what makes life significant. It took losing my memory and finding your family to remind me of that. The children were listening intently, unusual stillness from both of them indicating their awareness of the importance of the conversation. So I've made some decisions, Arthur continued. I've restructured my role at Vance Innovations. I'm still CEO, but I've delegated many of the day-to-day responsibilities to a team of executives I trust. This gives me more time and freedom to focus on the aspects of the business I find most meaningful and to pursue other interests. That sounds like a positive change, Nora said, genuinely pleased for him. But why are you telling us this? Arthur smiled, a hint of nervousness showing through his usual confidence. Because one of those other interests involves Frostpine Ridge, specifically, a project I'd like to undertake here. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a slim folder, placing it on the coffee table between them. I've purchased land adjacent to your property, 50 acres including the hill where I crashed. Nora's eyes widened in surprise. You bought land here? Why? Several reasons, Arthur replied. First, I'm establishing a foundation focused on supporting rural communities like Frostpine Ridge, creating jobs, improving infrastructure, ensuring access to education and technology. I want to use this town as a model for what's possible when resources are directed thoughtfully. Leo leaned forward, clearly intrigued. What kind of jobs? All kinds, Arthur said. From technical positions at a new research facility I'm planning to build, to service roles, to creative opportunities. The goal is to create a thriving ecosystem where people can find meaningful work without having to leave their community. That's ambitious, Nora said, trying to process the scale of what he was describing. But why Frostpine Ridge specifically? There are thousands of small towns struggling across the country. Arthur's expression softened. Because this is where I found something I had lost, a sense of what really matters. And because the people here, especially in this cabin, showed me extraordinary kindness when they had every reason to focus only on their own survival. He turned to the children. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you both. I've established educational trusts for each of you. When you're ready for college or vocational training, the funds will be there to support whatever path you choose. Leo's eyes widened. For real? Any college? Any college? Arthur confirmed. Or technical program or apprenticeship or whatever form of education suits your goals and talents. Kira looked confused. What's a trust? It's like a special savings account, Nora explained, still processing the magnitude of Arthur's gesture. For your future, Arthur, Nora said, turning back to him. This is incredibly generous, but it's too much. The repairs, the gifts, those we could accept as thanks for helping you. But this, she gestured to the folder containing details of his plans for the town and the children's education. This goes far beyond any obligation you might feel. Arthur leaned forward, his expression earnest. It's not about obligation, Nora. It's about choice, about directing my resources toward things that matter, toward people who matter. He paused, something vulnerable entering his expression. And you three matter to me, very much. The implication hung in the air between them, too significant to dismiss, yet too delicate to address directly in front of the children. Sensing the shift in the conversation, Leo stood up. Come on, Kira, he said with unusual perception. Let's go look at the land Arthur bought. We can see it from the back porch. Kira seemed about to protest, but something in her brother's expression stopped her. Okay, she agreed, following him out of the room. When they were alone, Arthur spoke again, his voice quieter. There's one more thing I wanted to discuss with you, Nora. Something more personal. Nora felt her heart rate quicken. Yes? The house I'm planning to build on the land I purchased. I don't envision it as a vacation home or a weekend retreat. I'm thinking of it as a primary residence, at least for a significant portion of the year. You want to live in Frostpine Ridge? Nora couldn't hide her surprise. But your company, your life in the city. As I said, I've restructured my role, Arthur explained. Much of what I do can be done remotely, with occasional trips to the main office. And as for my life in the city, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The truth is, before the crash, I didn't have much of a life outside of work. No family, few close friends, little connection to any community. My house there was more a showcase than a home. He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers directly. What I experienced here, with you and the children, was something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A sense of belonging, of purpose beyond profit margins and technological innovations. I don't want to lose that. Nora felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a cautious hope she had not allowed herself to nurture during the weeks of his absence. And the foundation, the land purchase, the educational trusts, they're not just about gratitude, are they? Arthur shook his head. No, they're about creating a future where our lives can remain connected, where I can be part of your community, part of your children's lives, and perhaps, he hesitated again, venturing into territory that clearly felt unfamiliar to him, perhaps part of your life as well, if you're open to that possibility. The directness of his statement took Nora's breath away. After Mark's death, she had focused solely on survival and on caring for her children. The idea of a personal connection, of allowing someone new into her heart, had seemed an impossible luxury. Arthur, she began, careful with her words, I'm very touched by what you're saying, but our worlds are so different. You're used to a certain lifestyle, certain circles. I'm a small-town librarian with 2 children and more challenges than achievements to my name. That's where you're wrong, Arthur said gently. Your achievements are extraordinary. You've raised 2 remarkable children alone, maintained your integrity through hardship that would break many people, and shown a capacity for kindness and generosity that humbles me. Those are the achievements that matter. He reached across the space between them, offering his hand. I'm not suggesting we rush into anything, just that we allow ourselves the opportunity to explore what might be possible between us, now that crisis and necessity aren't the foundation of our connection. Nora looked at his outstretched hand, at the face that had become dear to her in such a short time. The sensible part of her warned that this was too much, too fast, too unlikely to succeed given the vast differences in their circumstances. But another part, a part that had been dormant for too long, urged her to take the chance, to believe that something beautiful could grow from their unusual beginning. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. I think I'd like that, she said softly, to see what might be possible. Arthur's smile was like sunrise after the longest night, full of promise and warmth. That's all I'm asking for, a chance. From the porch, they heard Kira's excited voice calling, Mom, Arthur, come look, there's deer in the meadow. Still holding hands, they rose to join the children, stepping together into the clear afternoon light. The view from the porch revealed not just deer grazing in the distance, but a landscape transformed by recent snow into a pristine wonderland, beautiful in its simplicity. That's where the house will be, Arthur said, pointing to a gentle rise overlooking a small lake. If all goes according to plan, construction will begin in the spring. It's a beautiful spot, Nora acknowledged, trying to imagine a house there, likely a grand one, given Arthur's resources. As if reading her thoughts, he added, nothing ostentatious, just comfortable, with good light and space for work and creativity. I was thinking a large workshop where Leo and I could tinker with projects, and maybe a studio where Kira could pursue her art, and a library, of course, with shelves from floor to ceiling. The care with which he had considered not just his own needs but those of her children touched Nora deeply. Over the following months, Arthur's vision for Frostpine Ridge began to take shape. The foundation he established started with practical improvements, upgrading the town's internet infrastructure, renovating the community center, providing grants for small businesses, but it expanded to include programs that nurtured the community's unique character and potential, arts initiatives, technical training for high school students, resources for local farmers to adopt sustainable practices. True to his word, Arthur divided his time between his corporate responsibilities and his growing involvement in Frostpine Ridge. The research facility he built on the outskirts of town created dozens of well-paying jobs, with a focus on hiring locally whenever possible. His house on the hill emerged gradually, not the mansion many had expected, but a thoughtfully designed home that harmonized with its natural surroundings. Most importantly, his relationship with Nora and the children evolved at its own pace, built on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than obligation or gratitude. He became Uncle Arthur to the children, a mentor to Leo in his growing interest in engineering, and an enthusiastic supporter of Kira's artistic endeavors. For Nora, he became something more, a partner, a confidant, a reason to believe in second chances. Their courtship was careful, mindful of the children's feelings and the curious eyes of the small town. But it was also deep, rooted in the connection that had formed during those desperate days in the blizzard, and strengthened by the months of getting to know each other as they truly were, not as circumstances had cast them. One evening in early summer, almost a year after the crash that had brought them together, they sat on the porch of Nora's cabin, now a warm, secure home rather than a shelter on the edge of survival. The children were inside, Leo working on a science project while Kira practiced her dance routine in the newly expanded living room. I received the final report from my medical team today, Arthur said, breaking a comfortable silence. "They've officially declared my recovery complete. No more follow-up appointments. No more tests." "That's wonderful news," Nora said, genuinely pleased. "How does it feel?" Arthur considered the question. "Strange in a way. For so long, the accident and its aftermath have been central to my narrative. Now it's just part of my history. An important part, certainly, but not defining." "And your memory?" Nora asked. "Is it fully restored?" "As much as it's going to be," Arthur replied. "There are still some blank spots from the weeks before the crash, and the crash itself remains mostly a blur, but the important parts have returned." He turned to face her more directly. "Do you know what memory came back most vividly, most completely?" Nora shook her head. "Waking up in your cabin," Arthur said softly. "Opening my eyes and seeing your face, concerned but kind. Kira calling me Arthur because I reminded her of a brave knight in her storybook. Leo, suspicious but still helping, still doing what was right despite his reservations." He took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished between them. "Even before I remembered being Arthur Vance, I remembered being cared for by your family. What you did was extraordinary, and it changed me, Nora. Not just my circumstances or my priorities, but me, who I am at my core." From inside the cabin came the sound of Kira's laughter, followed by Leo's deeper voice joining in. The simple joy of it wrapped around them like a blanket on a cold night. "I have something for you," Arthur said, reaching into his pocket. "Not a grand gesture, just a token of what these months have meant to me." He handed her a small, worn compass, its brass case scratched and weathered. "This belonged to my grandfather," he explained. "He gave it to me when I was about Leo's age, told me it would always help me find my way home. I carried it for years, then somewhere along the line, as success and ambition took over, I put it away." "It's beautiful," Nora said, opening the case to reveal the delicate mechanism inside, still pointing unerringly north. "I found it again recently, going through some old things," Arthur continued, "and I realized it had been right all along. I just needed to understand what home really meant." He looked into her eyes, his own full of quiet certainty. "It's not a place, Nora. It's people. It's connection. It's where you're truly seen and valued for who you are, not what you have or what you can achieve." He closed her fingers gently around the compass. "You and the children helped me find my way home. I want you to have this as a reminder that sometimes being lost is the first step to being found." The simple gift, with its profound meaning, brought tears to Nora's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning forward to press a kiss to his cheek. "For finding us in that storm. For coming back. For everything." Arthur smiled, wrapping an arm around her shoulders and drawing her close. "Thank you for saving me," he replied, "in every way that matters." As they sat together in the gathering twilight, watching fireflies begin their evening dance over the meadow, Nora reflected on the strange, beautiful journey that had brought them to this moment. The compass in her hand was warm, a tangible symbol of the truth they had both discovered. Sometimes the most valuable things in life come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes, what seems like the end of the road is really just the beginning of a new journey, one that leads exactly where you need to go, even if you didn't know you were looking for it.